In summer 1974, New Jersey's newest theme park, Great Adventure, opened. The independently and locally owned entertainment complex had a few small rides and attractions, but with each passing season, the park grew in popularity. Park owner Warner Leroy was imaginative in how he ran the park, but the businessman needed outside help to manage Great Adventure's increasing attendance. Leroy sold the park to Six Flags in 1977, a few years after opening. The Texas-based amusement chain was more experienced in attracting and managing larger crowds, as well as making sound business decisions to position the park for success. Among many changes and updates, Six Flags invested in Great Adventure by installing large thrill rides and planned to boost the park's annual attendance by extending its operating schedule later into the year. To attract visitors during the slow fall months, Six Flags partnered with George Mahana of the Toms River Haunted House Company to lease a portable haunted house attraction. Simply known as Haunted House, the attraction opened in 1978 and was constructed of 4 retired aluminum semi-trailers with pre-installed scenes inside. Its wooden facade, which was built by the park, depicted a dilapidated haunted house, drawing guests in to experience sinister frights inside from a butcher, a vampire, and more. Haunted House was open only at night and had long lines, oftentimes over an hour. Because of the attraction's popularity, Six Flags opened Haunted House during the park's daytime hours. With guests lining up, this haunt was only the beginning of even bigger scares planned for the park and the true horror that would soon flare. When the 1978 season came to a close, Six Flags Great Adventure retired its haunted house attraction and shipped the portable structure to its sister park, Six Flags Over Mid-America, where it would reopen and operate for a few more seasons. Back in New Jersey, Six Flags used the recently unused plot of land from the short-lived Alpen Blitz coaster to construct a new walkthrough maze called Haunted Castle Across the Moat, commonly known as Haunted Castle for short. It opened in 1979, just one season after its predecessor, Haunted House, closed. To enter the all-new Haunted Castle, guests walked on a bridge over a moat toward the attraction's towering facade. Once inside, guests walked either left or right into one of 2 near-identical paths. The main difference was that the 2 sides were mirrored from each other. By having 2 sides, the attraction doubled its capacity, with the left side being known as the blue side and the right side being known as the red side. The castle's interior was intense and intimidating, with a foreboding soundtrack playing, strobe lights flashing, and fog filling the air. The walkthrough experience featured various frightening themes and characters with amusement park level quality sets. The first scene guests saw was a rat lady followed by a butcher scare in the same hallway. Guests turned a corner to encounter the Hunchback of Notre Dame, then navigating through a dark angular passageway that led to a Phantom of the Opera scene. A lady on a wheel was at the end of the hallway. Guests turned a corner and walked down a black and white striped corridor with strobing lights, one of the more prominent moments in the castle. Around the corner, guests came face to face with Frankenstein's monster. From here, the path curved around a dungeon scene, covered with spiders and their webs. This section led into dark caves and into the attraction's final scene, a spiraling vortex tunnel illusion that put guests off balance. The 7,000 square foot building put guests on their own to walk through about 450 feet of winding hallways with ambient lighting and spotlights pointed at scare actors dressed as Count Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, Lizzie Borden, and more. Although the attraction's developer recommended having 17 employees to run the Haunted Castle, Six Flags decided to use 13 employees, up to 10 inside and 3 outside, one of which called a rover who would routinely patrol the interior for misconduct and safety issues. The number of employees on a given day depended on whether or not the 2 sides were in operation. Both sides were used on busy days, but only one on slow days. The experience lasted between 7 to 9 minutes from beginning to end, accommodating about 1,600 visitors per hour. The attraction was very much of amusement park quality, especially the building itself. The structure was built from 8 retired aluminum semi-trailers for each side, with a control room in the center of the layout, totaling in 17 interconnected trailers. It had black spray-painted plywood for its ceiling and walls, in addition to other materials being used, such as paper mache and fiberglass for various props and sets. A polyurethane pad was installed on the wall at the end of the strobing hallway. This padding was added because of frequent incidents including guests accidentally running into the wall due to the hallway's disorienting effects. After an unbearably hot inaugural season, the Haunted Castle was retrofitted in 1980 with an air conditioning ventilation system and air vents installed in the floor. Around this time, Six Flags hired a fire protection engineer to evaluate the attraction's safety provisions collisions. While the engineer made recommendations such as a sprinkler system, also suggesting smoke and fire detectors as an affordable alternative, the park passed over most of the recommendations, installing only battery-operated smoke detectors that would shortly after be vandalized, broken, and never replaced. By 1981, the building's interior was refurbished. However, the park over the years had ignored numerous safety and cosmetic improvements for the walkthrough attraction, including report findings from an insurance audit, despite Six Flags investing $21 million across the park a year prior, and the attraction's developer personally offering to refurbish or replace the building. The Haunted Castle in 1984 remained a part of the park's lineup of attractions, now open for its 5th season of operation. Friday, May 11th, 1984. Six Flags Great Adventure then ranked as the 3rd busiest amusement park in the United States, only behind the Disney parks in Florida and California. With the summer season approaching, the park was facing one of the busier days of the year so far. Schools from across the area held field trips at the Six Flags Great Adventure theme park. Dutch rock band Golden Earring was preparing for a concert in the park that evening. Between the teenagers and concert goers, about 10,000 guests were in the park by evening time. Then, guests were lining up outside the Haunted Castle, which had opened for the season approximately a month prior after inspections and was allegedly understaffed that night. Groups of about 10 guests per minute were let in at a time. 2 teenage girls were next in line waiting to enter, and they were split up between 2 groups by an employee, with one going inside the attraction and the other being told to wait with the next group. The girl walking in had second thoughts and gave up her spot. Her friend was then allowed to join the group ahead and enter the attraction into the red side of the building, the only side in operation that day. Guests in front of her used cigarette lighters to illuminate their path, particularly down the long hallway with a strobe light, which had been malfunctioning that day, leaving guests to navigate in complete darkness for periods of time. By the time the girl reached the exit only a few minutes later, she turned around and saw the Haunted Castle Across the Moat attraction she had just been in was on fire. Had the teenage girl been held back at the entrance as originally instructed, she would have been inside. That was the case, however, for 29 other people. The time was 6:30 p.m., and the structure was quickly going up in flames with people inside. Smoke filled the hallways, choking guests inside. Witnesses say it smelled like toxic materials burning rather than a typical wood smoke scent. This heavy smoke minimized the already limited visibility in the windowless building. Guests screamed "fire" and fled to any exit they could find. Employees inside, dressed as ghouls and monsters, did their best to clear the building. A group of 4 friends was able to locate an emergency exit at the rear of the building and safely escape, while others frantically rushed out of the haunted castle. Meanwhile, as the thick smoke rolled through the hallways, a group of 9 teenagers had been hiding in the haunted castle to scare a group behind them as a prank. Clouds of smoke filled the air inside the tight hallways. The teenagers at first thought this was an effect in the castle, but they quickly realized the truth when solid black smoke rolled toward them. Now panic-stricken, they did not know which way to turn as they tried to escape and save their own lives. One teenager in the group, 14-year-old Suzette Elliott, had been separated from the others and was knocked to the ground while guests evacuated from the burning building. As the others scattered, Suzette had been looking for her friend, Tina, and was trying on her own to navigate through the dark maze-like hallways herself. With a bandana covering her mouth and nose, Suzette stopped when she became exhausted from breathing in smoke. Suzette, now kneeling on the ground, could not continue. Gary Kaplow was working outside the attraction that night when rattled guests reported a fire to him. Because of the fake fire lighting effect inside the attraction, guests reported fires every so often. But Kaplow was alarmed when the guests reported the fire in a different location from where the simulated effect was. He knew this was real. With no firefighters on site, Kaplow reacted with instinct and ran into the building. The hallways were buried with smoke while guests continued to evacuate. Kaplow ran in as far as he could and thankfully found Suzette Elliott on the ground near the coffin scene toward the beginning of the attraction. Kaplow, who was familiar with the building, picked up Suzette and carried her in his arms safely out of the burning attraction. She was treated with an oxygen mask once outside. Suzette likely would not have survived if it were not for this employee. Kaplow testified that the staff at this point believed the attraction had been cleared of all guests. rest. In either case, the building was not safe to re-enter as the smoke and flames had become too intense. The air conditioning unit had automatically turned on due to high temperatures, but it would only fan the flames. The fire spread so rapidly that the entire structure was burning within an estimated 4.5 minutes. With the highly combustible structure burning down, temperatures reached an overwhelming 2,000 degrees. Six Flags had 2 firefighters on duty that evening. The Great Adventure Fire Brigade was on the scene at 6:35 p.m. Within minutes of the first sign of fire as noticed by an employee, the captain on duty with water pumps and a hose was able to enter the building about 20 feet but had to immediately retreat due to the heat, smoke, and flames. Six Flags security at 6:41 p.m. alerted municipal fire crews from Jackson and surrounding cities. Fire trucks were dispatched, and the first arrived at 6:52 p.m., about 22 minutes after the initial report of a fire. Firefighters now had to control a building that had been completely engulfed by a growing fire, with flames piercing through the roof. Park guests gathered around the scene but were asked to leave as the disaster became more intense. The firefighters, however, were unaware 8 teenagers were still trapped inside, the same 8 who were with Suzette Elliott before being separated. Among the group, Joby Rowdy was slightly ahead of the other 7. The rest were on the ground about 20 feet from an emergency exit, with their faces pressed up against an air conditioning vent on the floor for fresh air. No one was able to come to their rescue. The remaining 8 guests inside died due to severe smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning. The victims were all between just 15 and 19 years old. Cassville Fire Chief John W. Quebec said, quote, "By the time our men got there, the thing was totally involved, and there was no way to save the thing or anybody. We didn't know people were in the building. There was no way you could even go to them if you knew. They died of suffocation before the fire company even got there. That's my feeling," unquote. 15 fire crews arrived at the haunted castle that night. The 200 total firefighters and rescue squad workers from 11 surrounding communities took about 70 minutes to extinguish the fire, officially under control at 7:41 p.m. Nearby rides were still in operation, with screams from parkgoers adding to the ambience. That night, park officials closed the park to guests 2 hours early at 8 p.m. Six Flags offered a free return ticket to everyone in attendance. The park opened the next day. Crews continued through the night to inspect the rubble and partially melted semi-trailer structure. They spent hours searching the remains of the building, examining burned props and mannequins, unfortunately discovering 8 bodies in the debris. Police Commissioner Richard Boris of the local township said, quote, "Initially, we thought they were mannequins, but then we discovered they were bodies," unquote. At 10:45 p.m., officials confirmed the heartbreaking deaths that occurred. The bodies had not yet been identified. The park and local authorities received hundreds of calls from worried parents whose children had not come home. Buses of children left the property earlier in the evening. The head counts were off for many buses, and people wanted answers. May 15th, 1985. A year after the disaster at the Haunted Castle attraction, trials began for the alleged manslaughter and aggravated manslaughter against the Six Flags Great Adventure theme park and its parent company, Six Flags Corporation. Many factors were proposed as to why the victims could not escape. The structure had an intentionally disorienting layout and dimly lit interior for amusement purposes, making it difficult to evacuate. It was fabricated out of various flammable materials, fueling to the fire that led to the wrongful death of 8 teenagers. However, because of the structure's build, it was considered temporary and was not subject to the same building codes as a permanent structure. With no permanent foundation beneath, the building had very low regulations to meet and was not required to be inspected by the local township. Six Flags received 7 reports recommending a sprinkler system, additional fire safety doors, improved emergency lighting, and easily accessible emergency exits. The park did install smoke detectors in 1979, but due to vandalism, they did not operate for long, and the park did not replace them, leaving the building without a fire safety system for over 5 years. Reports state the fire started at the end of a strobe hallway when a teenage guest brushed their lighter against the polyurethane padding installed to protect guests from bumping into the wall. The material ignited, and flames spread down the plywood hallway and into other sections of the building. Six Flags was accused of ignoring repeated safety warnings regarding the building and its lack of sprinklers, smoke detectors, and sufficient sufficient exits. The defendant, Six Flags, opposed that the fire was an act of arson, and a sprinkler system would not have prevented the fire from spreading given its intensity. This cleared the park of responsibility. The foreman of the jury stated that the local township of Jackson was more at fault for not requiring more safety measures, claiming, quote, "Someone there wasn't doing his job," unquote. On Saturday, July 20th, 1985, after an 8-week trial, the corporations were acquitted of manslaughter and aggravated manslaughter. They were cleared of their charges. Following the verdict, some of the victims' families opened civil suits against the corporations, local township, and manufacturer involved. In various suits, 7 of the 8 affected families settled out of court, with the 8th family opting to settle in a trial. The National Fire Protection Agency, which is an international nonprofit for fire safety, found the following to be the 3 major factors contributing to the loss of life in this incident. Number 1, failure to detect and extinguish the fire with proper safety systems. Number 2, the ignition of highly flammable materials and combustible interior finishes. And number 3, the difficulty to escape due to fire conditions and the haunted house type environment. Other safety precautions that would have helped include emergency lighting and clearly marked emergency exits, of which the attraction had 3. Following the incident, stricter regulations were enforced for amusement structures across the country to prevent future disasters. Amusement buildings were now required to have automatic fire and smoke detection devices, a switch to shut off disorienting effects and ventilation systems, a public address system, lighted directional markings to exits, use of fireproof decorations and Class 1 building materials, sprinklers, and exits that are maintained in a safe condition that are free from obstructions. The park made the decision not to build an attraction on the former haunted castle site. The location was repurposed in 1989, 5 years after the fire, for a leisure area called Botanical Garden. The space today is now home to Cyborg Cyber Spin, an intense spinning flat ride. Six Flags Great Adventure has not built a memorial for the victims of the fire, but some local schools where the victims attended have dedicated small memorials to honor those who were lost May 11th, 1984. Jose Carrion, Lenny Ruiz, Sammy Valentin, Eric Rodriguez, Christopher Harrison, Joe B. Rudy, Nick Kayata, and Tina Genovese.